So let's bring in Philip Holloway. He's an attorney and has followed this so closely. Not surprising, right? With all the speculation in and around her that she would get herself a lawyer at this point.
Well, if you take it all in context, you know, she made some statements at the funeral that certainly raised some eyebrows, and the testimony from the preliminary hearing about some statements that she allegedly made with her husband when they were in a police interview room, seemingly not knowing that they were being recorded. Those have all at minimum raised eyebrows, and it doesn't surprise me that under the circumstances she's seeking the advice of counsel, because that's what you really would want to do anytime there's even the possibility, even if it's remote, that you might be charged with a crime.
There you go. Well, you just mentioned it, and it was part of those details that came out of Thursday's probable cause hearing that were jaw-dropping. Some of the things she said. First thing she says to folks at daycare, right. Ross must have left him in the car, and then police saying a conversation between Leanna and Ross, and she says, you didn't say too much. All right, Philip, if you're the attorney hired by Leanna Harris, are you asking for clarification of things like that she has said?
Right. We're going to need to know the entire context of what she said. Who did she say it to? What were her exact words? What you saw at the preliminary hearing was only a summary, if you will, and even a subjective interpretation, perhaps, of what she said. So we want to know who she said it to, what precisely was said, were there other witnesses, and in what context. There you go. And again, we're going over the facts of this case, what we've heard. You guys have been reacting as we continue to share this story. One other thing we heard at that probable cause hearing, Philip, and this is, relayed to us from Detective Stoddard, is a conversation. It's a phone call from Leanna's mom, her mom, so the grandmother of little Cooper, and she's hysterical to find out little Cooper's gone, and zero emotion from Leanna as she talks to her own mother. Let's listen to that.
She just started screaming, and she's like, what do you mean Cooper's no longer here? What do you mean? And during this conversation, with all this emotion coming out, she's asked Leanne, they can hear
emotion, who's the emotion coming from?
The emotion's coming from her mom, or who she identified as her mom. And during this, she's like, why aren't you crying? Why aren't you reacting to this?
And what did Leanna say?
She said, I must be in shock.
It's comments like that. Even her courtroom behavior, which we see here, she's just chewing gum as she's hearing details of her son's death that are curious, to say the least.
Curious, to say the least. That's exactly right, Mike. You know, again, we don't know how we would act if we were in that right. same situation. Every one of us who is a parent, you know, if we're faced with something like this, who knows how we would act? Everybody's got in their mind some preconceived notion of how somebody's supposed to act, right. But I think until you actually find yourself in that tragic circumstance, you really don't know how you would react.
Yeah. And on that point about the internet searches and this scout.com profile is RJ and call me, or something like contact me, I'm harmless, I'm paraphrasing here. How damning is that? Court of public opinion, very damning. What about in a court of law?
Well, it all depends on whether or not they can link this in any way to the death of the child. That's the key. If it's totally unrelated, then it means nothing, and it's irrelevant to the case. On the other hand, if it turns out that there's sufficient evidence that this was something intentional, it all becomes part of the motive, and it shows perhaps that he's leading a double life, and maybe he wants to have a life without a child.
There you go. Any more on a timeline as far as, you know, looking at computer
point? You know, you've got 90 days to either indict him or he gets bonded. Whether they give it to him or not, I think that's right, yeah.
Right. What it is, if he doesn't get indicted within 90 days, he's automatically entitled to a bond. But the thing that you got to remember is that the judge at the preliminary hearing decided that he did not meet the legal criteria to be eligible for bond. So the judge is going to have to consider those very same criteria if he's in the position of having to grant a bond, so you can expect one to be very high. He's not entitled to a bond that he can make. It could be $5 million cash.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Philip, thank you. Victor, thank you. Is this so? Our colleagues at CNN, us ourselves, we're all staying on top of this. Any new developments? Obviously, the new development today, besides the toxicology reports.